Thank you for the opportunity to speak about owning tomorrow. In 1994, there was a very highly paid hedge fund manager in New York City who just got married. He was 30 years old, and he decided to quit everything and move to the West Coast. He had always wanted to start his own company, but had never quite found the right thing to do until he started reading about something called the internet. He was sure, when he found out more about it, that this was the business opportunity that he had been looking for his entire life. So he picked up, moved west, using some rudimentary technology and some funds from his friends and family. He started a business. He was selling books online, and he made money instantly. 6 years later, in 2000, his company had generated $1 billion in sales, but was still not making any money. In the process, though, he had upended the publishing industry and changed it forever. He also recently became the wealthiest man in the world, and his company is set to reach $200 billion in revenue and make money. So if you don't know by now that I'm talking about Jeff Bezos, you're in the wrong presentation. He is what I would call the master of business disruption. He and his company, the interestingly named Amazon, have not only disrupted the publishing industry, but certain very important segments of the consumer electronics industry, the IT industry, and the entertainment industry. And it's all because they have at heart one very simple but powerful mission statement: to be the most consumer-centric company in the world. And that gives them a lot of territory to work on. And so he has now decided, Jeff, with Amazon, to work with Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon to attack the single most dysfunctional industry in the world, the US healthcare industry. So business disruption is the word of the day. Everybody's talking about it. It's hip, it's modern, it's cool, it's very new millennial. However, this is one of the oldest tools that human beings have to increase their standard of living and improve our time on Earth. Because it is our ability to invent and reinvent the single most important tools we have, i.e. technology, systems, and processes, that allows us to constantly improve how we get goods, the way we get goods, when we get them, what we pay for them. It is, again, one of the most important things for mankind. Unfortunately, it is called disruption for a reason. What happens is, in the process of this constant cycle of reinvention, we have to adapt to new ways of doing things. That sends us into a moment of chaos, either on small scale or on rather large scale. And with chaos, there's always comes fallout, and there are always winners and losers. You have the people who move quickly and can adapt to the situation, but others whose careers end, their jobs end, their companies go under, communities are decimated. So it's no wonder that human beings look at disruption and say, I don't know if I like this thing. And in fact, there's a lot of people who actively try to disrupt disruption. However, as I said, this is probably the number one reason that the human race has survived and thrived for millions of years, is exactly this ability to disrupt ourselves and transform our institutions, ourselves, our tools, and so forth. So the only thing is, without business disruption, without business leaders who understand disruption, how to do it, there would be no disruption. So what is a disruptive business leader? Jeff Bezos, I said, is of course the master, is the one everybody first thinks of. I think of Michael Dell, Bill Gates, Jack Ma, a non-American. The list goes on. These are men and a few women who actually work on being disruptive. They do not create things in the way we think inventors usually create things. So like the Wright brothers or Thomas Edison or Alexander Graham Bell. They all created outstanding new technologies that revolutionized the world. Disruptors are not inventors. They are businessmen who are intent on fixing something that is no longer working and no longer adding value to the human condition. So for example, Michael Dell did not invent the computer. He did not do anything significant to the software or the hardware. All he did was change how computers were manufactured and distributed, and that in itself was a gargantuan disruption to the way we had received computers, so that now we could receive them customized, we could receive them quicker and cheaper. And in the process, he began what we now know as the end of traditional retail. And this was even before the internet came about. So what are some of the other hallmarks of disruptors? Well, as I said, there are always winners and losers in a disruption, at least short term. And so they accept very much that the world is about winning and about losing, and they're intent on always being on the winning side and not the losing side. They also would be what I'd say not your typical leaders. They can be a little bit freaky, they can be very introverted, intellectual. They're not exactly your outgoing sort of in-your-face, great sort of leader that shines every time they show up. They often are behind the scenes type of people. Names like Reid Hoffman, who was more or less an intellectual who decided to build LinkedIn, is a good example. They're also continuous learners, which is a very important concept for disruptive leaders. Even though some of them never finished college, Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg, and Gates being the three that come to mind, many of them do indeed have PhDs from leading universities. But they're really brainiacs. And what continuous learning means is that they know no matter where they are, any encounter, any experience, anything they see could be the answer to a solution they're looking for. So they are out in the world constantly listening, observing, and trying to figure out where the next solution is. Two other very important things about disruptive leaders. One is they know that you have to deliver the value proposition that has been with mankind from the beginning. You want the products you want, as I said, how you want them, the cost you want them, and the way you want them, and or you want things eliminated out of your life, such as boredom, uncertainty, or so forth, all the way to illness and poverty. If a disruptive business doesn't understand the basic value propositions for a consumer or the end user, it's not a business. And this is from time immemorial. And that brings me to one of the last most important points, is that disruptors understand that more stays the same than changes in disruptive. It is highly strategic. By virtue of putting the consumer at the center of a dysfunctional process or industry, that in itself is enough to start dislodging mostly the powerful, influential current players who are controlling a market, which is one of the reasons why it needs to be disrupted. But it doesn't mean that the whole thing changes at once. It means that with technology or a new business model or something else, you take out pieces of the dysfunctional system or process, thereby beginning to radicalize it. Again, Jeff Bezos is the one who taught us more stays the same than changes in disruption. And a good example of what can happen when disruption becomes destruction is when you get a CEO like Travis Kalanick at Uber, who completely disregarded all the best practices, really sort of classic principles of organizational behavior. There was no C-suite. He was sort of in control of everything. He completely disregarded certain legal, employment law, ethics, and behavior patterns that really any large organization has to respect before something goes wrong. And because of that, he obviously had to resign, and Uber went in a sort of mini tailspin based on sexual harassment lawsuits, certain licenses not being renewed in certain cities. And again, the principles he disregarded is core values that really resonate with the people, respect for your employees, having a structure that makes you more dispensable than indispensable. These were all things that, as Jeff Bezos said, should have been there regardless of the disruption. He got the value proposition right, Travis Kalanick, but a lot of the other stuff he didn't get. So in conclusion, I want to tell you about the other very important aspect of disruption, which is personal disruption. You don't know at any point in your life when something's going to change and you have to adapt or you need to disrupt yourself. You may also just notice, as so often happens, that you're not achieving your goals. And that means you have to somehow change, disrupt, transform the way you're thinking about something, the way you're doing it. Sean is a very nice, very outgoing entrepreneur. He rewards his staff. He's well liked by everybody, his clients. He started out as a Navy SEAL after college, did his MBA, then went to Ernst & Young as a risk management consultant. And his largest client, a very important client, said, I like you so much that if you decide to leave Ernst & Young and start your own firm, I'll go with you. So he did that. He left and started his own firm. And he had this one client. And he did very well in the sense of building a brand. He spoke at least 5 or 6 conferences every year. He must have published 100, 200 articles. He still is. He just had one problem. He didn't know how to sell. So this one client remained the bulk of his revenue for the last 10 years, for the 10 years of his firm, which is a big problem because the, say, 15% that was revenue not from his biggest client were all sorts of small one-offs from people he'd meet at a conference and so forth, not very sustainable. So of course, one day he gets that dreaded call from his largest client that they're going to shift the budget away from the projects his firm's been doing to somewhere else. And we're talking about good 85% of his revenue. And that's when I got the call from Sean saying, oh my God, what am I going to do? The call happened to have come in early September. The changes were going to be effective January 1st. So that gave us about 4 months to figure this out. So we talked, and it became very clear to me that he actually didn't know why the client had shifted the budget or decimated his projects. He had no idea. He had his theories and so forth. So obviously, first thing we had to do was get him to action and talking to his client and asking the right questions to figure out why, because you can't make any changes or suggest something if you don't know why. Questions are very important. The other thing was he had all these one-off smaller clients, but they were major corporations, and his specialty is risk management for multinational global companies. So I suggested, or I put him in action and said, you need to talk to the 15 next largest clients. As small as the projects might have been, you need to go back out to them, revive any relationships, and some of these relationships had lain dormant for 2, 3, 4 years, and see if you can get them back on board to do another project. In any ways, if the big client doesn't come back, you may have enough to at least get some more clients in. So he went back to his client, he had lunch with him, and what he discovered is that he had sort of fallen down on what this client had enjoyed for so long, which was going out for meals. They even went on vacations with their wives. And that had, in the race to do things, Sean had kind of let that go. And the client actually was just not happy because Sean wasn't really paying attention to all the other stuff going around the project. Once Sean was able to determine that and started going back to his old behaviors, i.e. disrupting what had happened, the client gave him back pretty much the entire budget, minus maybe about $500,000. So that he was able to start January 1st with a nice big project. As for the 15 smaller clients, we followed them very carefully. I coached him on every interview before he made them. I insisted that we do a debrief after every call with an action plan in terms of what his next steps are. And by January, mid-January, he was being asked for 2 proposals for well over $500,000 that he then won in the next 6 weeks. He had brought his company back from the brink because I was able to help him to recognize that he had to get back into action in a way that he had just kind of let fallow. Which brings me to the last point, which is if you are not willing to own your own tomorrow and you let somebody else own it for you, you're not going to have any tomorrow. So you need to use the force of disruptive leadership to own your tomorrow. Thank you.